Hi everyone, welcome back to Be Like Christ for our Bible study, 5-minute study through Matthew chapter 20 today. If you want the handout that you're about to see on the screen, you can get a copy of this one and for the other copies in the Gospel of Matthew down in the link to our website. If you want to support free handouts and the production of things like this so that people around the world can get them and use them and understand the Bible better, a link to our Patreon account is down there as well. Matthew chapter 20, when did the events of this chapter take place? Well, this is during Jesus' ministry. This is approximately 26 to 31 AD. So who are our main characters in this chapter? Well, we've got the two obvious ones, Jesus and his disciples and his followers. In the third place, we've got James and John's mother. James and John were two of the apostles, and their mother came to Jesus, and she had a question for him. We'll talk about that in a second. And then our fourth character, or characters, are two blind men who called out to Jesus for healing. Where did the events of chapter 20 take place? Well, we're not told exactly where Jesus told the parable of the vineyard workers, which is in verses 1 through 16. We do know that the events of 19 through 38, verses 19 through 38, occurred as Jesus was traveling south on his way to Jerusalem. And Jesus healed the two blind men in verse 29 through 34 when he was leaving the city of Jericho. So in the first section of our outline, let's talk about this parable that I just mentioned, the parable of the vineyard workers, verses 1 through 16. Early in the morning, the manager of a vineyard went out and he hired some workers for the day, and he agreed to pay them a penny for their labor. He went out at the 3rd hour and he hired some people. Then he went out at the 6th hour and the 9th hour and the 11th hour. And at the end of the day, all the workers assembled together to the manager to collect their pay, and he paid all of them a penny apiece. Those who had started at the beginning of the day, they were kind of angry because they got paid the same amount even though they had worked longer, and they protested, but the manager of the vineyard said, "Look, I gave you exactly what we agreed on." He had not been unfair to anyone. And Jesus concludes the parable saying, quote, "So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen." In verses 17 through 19, Jesus again prophesies his death and his resurrection. So he's on the way to Jerusalem, and he turns to his 12 apostles and he tells them that he is going to be betrayed to the Jews and condemned to die. And he goes on and he says that he's going to be turned over also to the Gentiles, mocked, scourged, and crucified, but that he would rise again from the dead on the 3rd day. And then in verses 20 through 28, James and John's mother comes to Jesus with a request. So she's called the mother of Zebedee's children. Zebedee was James and John's dad. And she asks Jesus if her sons could be honored and could sit on Jesus' right and left hand when he comes into his kingdom. Jesus told her that those positions were reserved for his father's selection. Now, when the other apostles heard about this, naturally they were kind of upset with James and John because of what their mother was doing. And Jesus taught all of the apostles, he said, "Whoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. Whoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant." And then as we conclude this chapter, 29 through 34, Jesus heals two blind men. So Jesus was leaving the city of Jericho, and there were two blind men who called out to him. And the surrounding crowds, they were trying to get the men to be quiet and to stop bothering Jesus, but Jesus had compassion on them, and he healed their eyes. So how does this chapter fit into the big picture of the Bible? Well, we read here about Jesus walking to his death sentence. The circumstances, the time, the events of Jesus' life, they were all known to him ahead of time. If he had wanted to avoid death, nobody could have killed him. He went to the cross willingly so that we could be forgiven. This was all part of God's plan from the very beginning. Jesus even said about his own death, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord." John 10, verse 18. And for our application, I'm going to change it up from what's on the notes, but that one's there as well, and it's just as relevant. But think about these two men who were yelling for Jesus to heal their eyes. People were trying to get them to be quiet, but they refused, right? They continued yelling. People were trying to hinder them from getting to Jesus, the only person who could solve their problem for them in the entire world, and they would not be stopped. We need to have the same kind of attitude when it comes to pursuing Jesus ourselves. We have a problem, namely sin. And no one in the entire universe can solve that problem except Jesus. Don't ever let somebody hinder you from finding your way to Him.